Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending the Luminati online workshop. My name is Omri. I'm Managing Director of North America. We'll have, first of all, the agenda for today. So I will start with just a little bit about data collection. We'll have Aviv discussing bot detection. And we also have Chris talking about our proxy manager. And Josh will discuss fingerprinting and Unblocker, which is very interesting. So if you have any questions, this is the way to ask. We'll have stops from every now and then to answer the questions and sometimes immediately. Feel free to ask any question and we'll appreciate your involvement. First of all, a bit about me. I'm with Luminati for the past 5 years. I've started out as a biz dev and grew with the company. Luminati has been through exponential growth for the past 5 years. We started with an API with a lot of IPs and grew to the premier and the leading force in data collection today. We've released a lot of products lately, anything from our proxy manager to our data collection platform, which we are very proud of, and we appreciate you attending here, and hopefully you'll have a good time. In North America, we are now opening a new team, so we'll have really expand our growth in the near future there. First, I will discuss the data collection transformation that we've seen lately. We all experienced COVID-19. In data collection, we've seen a lot of data points actually vanishing. So if in a few months ago, you could collect point of sale or even buy satellite images of parking lots all the way to miles traveled with airlines, everything vanished in the last couple of months. And that pushed data collection to the forefront. Online data collection was able during COVID-19 to bring a lot of information that no other data point could provide. Some of them just vanished, some of them stopped for a while, like a point of sale. And online data collection could also bring in some information of the future, some near live information of what's going on right now in terms of growth, and some information about what's going to happen in the future. I'll discuss travel in depth later, but just to mention, today, if you want to know what's the future pricing of travel, the only way you can do it is actually start to gather some of the online information. Another point is we've seen China, first of all, walk into the COVID-19 with searches of symptoms and so on, and kind of walk out of the COVID-19 with searches for domestic flights. Going into that a little bit more, we've seen the online data collection take an active part in COVID-19. The active part was could be anything from following FDA approvals of medicine or new drugs, all the way to following changes in retail, companies monitoring economies outside of their own country, all the way to companies filing for new drugs and so on. Luminati took an active role in COVID-19, and we partner with a major Israeli hospital, and the research discussed early symptoms of COVID-19 patients with low blood saturations. And Luminati assisted in finding devices that have sensors that are able to monitor blood saturation on devices, on mobile devices. So we gladly took part in that. We've seen that that as an opportunity, and I think it was great to have such a partnership with Asuta. A little bit about the travel industry. So we've seen the entire travel industry going through a paradigm shift. First, a lot of it, kind of immediately stopped. So we've seen flights stopped almost to 100%, hotels stopped to 100%, of course, rental cars stopped. But then we've seen how real-time or near-live data is helping the online travel industry, or the entire travel industry, change its ways. First, we've seen the pickup in domestic flights. We also have seen that there's some kind of a greater news that are happening. For example, Warren Buffett is selling its own shares in flights, and we've seen Expedia raise $3.2 billion. But we also seen TripAdvisor letting people go, also Airbnb. So this entire paradigm shift was available through to be monitored through the online data collection industry. And we've seen anything from gathering of future prices to looking for new ways for revenue, all the way to monitoring actually changes in personnel in the different companies, who is available and what kind of developers are released into the market. So it was very interesting to see the importance of real-life data on what is going into the industry. And to summarize, we think from what we see in the numbers that it's going to be growing back about 10% month over month, until we'll see about a stable 20% below last year on November. Very important topic for myself personally, but also for Luminati, is ethical data collection. At the core of Luminati is the ethical way that we, first of all, source our assets, all the way to the data collection activities itself. Let me see some questions. Sorry, I'll do it in a bit. So again, going to ethical data collection, it's very important for Luminati first to source the IPs ethically, also to collect the data ethically, and be partnering only with companies that are doing ethical activities. Here we see an example of Facebook actually taking down LeadCloak for violating the terms and policies. Luminati is monitoring the network, and we are doing it not only because we think legal is important. We see it as a mean for, first of all, the longevity of Luminati and our partners. And the second thing is that the users are generating the content in an ethical manner. So if you want the real data to be gathered, you have to act very similar to the user and to act in ethical manner. Don't harm the target website, or don't harm any targets on the way.
Omri, we have two questions from the audience. The first one is, what do we do with those data which we collected in COVID-19 situation of patients in hospitals?
So this was thank you for the question, Itamar. This was delivered to the hospital for the research. I think the research is already published, so we can actually read it. And
the second question that we got from the audience is, could you please explain what is a data collection, and is it a client using Luminati collection data? And you get to see what the data of Luminati is actively collecting data.
Thank you for the question. So when we talk about data collection, we discuss basically collecting mass amounts of information from public domains online. So it could be anything from gathering pricing over different e-commerce website. It could be gathering, running a competitive intelligence, anything from sourcing new vendors to comparing prices of different products. And it could be brand safety. We are very active actually in the financial technology market. So it could be anything from hedge funds and quant funds that are gathering online information that it's not published by the companies to make automatic trading decision. So data collection is basically gathering any information that's relevant online, that's available as public information online, and using it for making this business decision, business decisions.
Omri, just to make sure that we understand the question correctly, the customer asked us if the data was being collected by Luminati or by Luminati customer in this research.
Okay. In this research, it was gathered by Luminati, but it's usually we do not collect the information ourselves, but in this case, we helped because we know it's important. All right.
I guess that we have one last question before we continue. Sorry about that. The last question was, can you collect email address from LinkedIn or Facebook user, and is it ethical?
Thank you for the question. First of all, we do not gather personal information in general. Personal information, we don't gather personal information, and we do not cache any personal information as a habit. And we are compliant with any rules and regulations that are in place. In general, when you run a data collection activity, it's a responsibility of the customer also to make sure that the information gathered is also compliant with the local law. Every use case that goes through the Luminati compliance procedure is vetted to make sure that it's according to what we can provide. All right, let's. So we talked about ethical. I'll appreciate your time. We talked about ethical. We talked about COVID-19. Some transformation the data collection market has gone through. And let's go for the first question of the poll. If you could pop it up, please. So we would love to know. We'll have some questions along the way. So the first question: which of the following is your main data collection challenge today? So the first answer is unblocking e-commerce sites. This is a poll, right? So feel free to answer. Scaling data collection volume, overriding geographical restrictions, collecting data in real time, consistency, and maximizing data collection uptime. All right. So Itamar, let's see what's going on. All right, very interesting. Actually, collecting data in real time. This is a real challenge in data collection. Luminati is working hard to provide information in real time. We'll discuss later on. There's actually a lot of solutions that we can provide that can help you overcome it. I think it's one of the hard ones. Consistency and quality. That's actually very real also challenge. So now Aviv will talk about our bot detection techniques.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for attending our workshop. My name is Aviv. I'm a product manager in Luminati. I've been a company for about 4 years now, and I manage the data center network and the static residential network, basically our static networks. You can see my email down here on the bottom, so any questions that you forgot during the workshop you want to ask later. Sorry, 1 second. Okay, here we go. Go ahead, Kenshnia. Okay, here we go. Okay, so what we're going to discuss in this portion of the workshop is a few ways that websites classify the IP accessing it. And there's certain things the websites do with that in order to either give or deny access. and serve you adjusted information. Basically, this is very important to understand in order to be able to collect accurate data and get the results that you're aiming for. So we'll go over 3 basic ways how websites classify their users, or better said, the IPs that access it. First one is IP-based classification. So each IP address that reaches a website has different qualities, and the website checks that out. It helps to understand different things about you. We'll go into each one of the 3 in more depth in a few minutes. The second one is GEO-based classification. So websites see what country is the user coming from, and then they know how to serve the correct data, or deny access, give access, give a different process, and so on. And then there's rate limiting. So that's another tool the website uses to enforce wanted behavior. So we have another question for the audience, and that is, have you ever experienced any of the following issues which I've mentioned now, which are geo classification issues, or rate limiting, or some kind of issue that's related to the type of the IP that you're using? So this will be interesting to hear. And once I see the results, also I'll put more weight on the specific issues that you've been facing. So I see that many users says that I've been blocked because of my IP address. Okay, great. So this is exactly what we're going to talk about now. And this is the IP-based blocking and classification. So the first important things to understand is that your IP is classified generally as a server IP or a human user IP. So traditionally, servers would use data center IPs, and this is what you see here on the left side, the data center / web hosting / transit. A server has an IP address, it accesses a website, and it's classified as a server. And the rest of the types, also if you go to any geolocation database, you can see that yourself, are human or home users IP types. So fixed line ISP is the popular one, and then there's also mobile ISP. And then when you access with this IP, in the simplest way, the website knows that you're not a robot, you're a human being. And then it gives you maybe different content, and it'll definitely be much more careful before it blocks you. So another thing I want to address is, so why do websites give access to data center IPs to begin with? Well, there's certain services, APIs, integrated services with websites that come from servers, and that's natural. It's something integral for all the big websites. So it's okay to access from a data center website. Maybe a good example would be the Google crawler, which is indexing websites and putting them in the Google search engine. So it'll access from a server, obviously, and that'll be a data center IP. It adds some note or comment or key that mentions that it's Google. And then the websites obviously have an interest to let that crawler go through the website. So that's just one example. So basically, all types make sense. For the residential IPs, residential and mobile, that generally means it's a human user. And websites, especially e-commerce websites or any website selling something, will be very, very careful before they block someone that could be a human, because they could lose a potential customer. So we have another question for the audience, question number 3, and that is, what type of IP do you know or use in your practice? It could be a data center IP, could be a residential IP, a static residential IP, or a mobile IP. So again, each one of them has its own qualities, and working the right way, you could basically use all of them. Residential IPs. Okay, interesting. We'll talk a bit more about the residential network and its qualities in a second. So the first network I want to talk about, I'll go on each and every one of the networks we've mentioned and give the advantages for each one. So starting with the data center IPs, Luminati has over 770,000 residential IPs and growing very, very fastly. The main advantages of using a data center network is it's very cost efficient, and the IPs are fast and they're stable. So when you get a set of data center IPs, you can keep them for as long as you want, and for some use cases, this is very important. Also, Luminati enables both country and city targeting for its data center IPs. The second network is the residential network. This is the initial network that Luminati pioneered, and main advantages are it's a huge network. It has over 72 million IPs per month. So basically, some use cases that need a lot of IPs, this is a perfect network for them. These are real users' IPs. As I said before, websites will be very careful before they block someone that they suspect is a real user. The residential network also gives coverage for basically any country and city in the world. So that's a very, very big advantage. The third network.
Aviv, we have a question from the audience.
Sure.
Ken was asking, which is the most stable one?
So just to be clear, when I say stable, what I mean is the IP is not rotating. So the residential network, due to its unique architecture, using real users' IPs, we have certain rules. We don't want to interrupt with the real user usage. So the IP is not available all the time. As of data center and static residential IPs, these are our IPs. So we can use them for as long as we want and give them to our customers permanently. That means the IPs will not rotate unless you want them to rotate. So that's what I mean when I say stable. If we're asking about stability of the network, like performance-wise, all the networks are very stable. I hope that answers the question. The static residential network is kind of an in-between network. Basically, these are residential IPs that we get directly from ISPs. So they're classified as a residential IP, as a real user's IP, meaning the website will be very careful before they block it. And at the same time, these IPs are sitting on an architecture which is similar to a data center. That means we can use them for as long as we want. So these IPs are fast and stable. And we've had this network, it's the newest network we have for about 6 months or maybe almost a year now, and giving very, very good performance and high value for our customers. So the next kind of classification we'll be discussing is geo-based classification.
Aviv, before we continue, we have a few more questions from the audience. The first one from Jonathan. So is there an average lifetime for a given dynamic residential IP?
It's hard to say because it depends on the specific type of, there's different sources for residential IPs through our SDK, all of course with consent of the users, the end users, but some come from mobile apps, some come from desktops. So there's no way one number I can give. It could range anywhere from 10-15 minutes to several hours and sometimes even more, but it really changes. And the unique solution we brought to that is we have what we call GIPs, which is groups of IPs which can be used permanently by the customer, and at least 3 of them will be available in a given time, and they're all from the same location. So that usually answers that need.
Another question that we have from the audience is how many total static residential IP do we have?
Right now, we have around 100,000 static residential IPs, and we're growing all the time, and we get more and more by demand. So no number would be a limit for us. Let's put it this way.
Another question that we've got from the audience is when the residential IP owners need it, the connection is interrupted or changed to another IP. What if we're using sticky session?
So when the residential peer is not available, it doesn't matter if you're using a sticky session or anything of that sort, the IP will be switched to a different IP. So you're probably going to get a socket hangup and then establish a new connection with a new IP.
Another question is, what is the difference between static and data center IP?
So data center IPs are IPs which are classified as data center IPs, meaning server IPs. As I said before, traditionally, these IPs are just used for being the IP address of a server. Today, companies like ourselves are using huge amounts of data center IPs to allow data collection. Static residential IP is an IP which is classified, since it's coming from an ISP, as a residential IP. So it's the same classification as your home IP. The only difference is that instead of being in a box in a fiber cable going to your house, it's sitting in a server so that we can use it in mass scale. I hope that answered the question.
Another question is, how do you get access to residential IP? How does the user lend you the IP?
So we have different, our SDK is implemented in different web and desktop apps. And maybe a good example would be an app would offer you either to pay for the app or join to the Luminati network, contribute a tiny amount of your package resources without you ever feeling it, because we'll protect your usage, and you won't have to pay for the service. Or maybe instead of paying, it'll be some service that will say, if you don't want to see ads, you can join into the become a Luminati peer, and then you won't see any ads. Of course, it's all in full consent, full clarity, and we're very, very proud of that. Okay, so next type of classification is the geo-based classification. Whenever you access a website, the website checks where you're coming from, at least most of them. There's a few reasons they want to do that. One reason would be maybe they want to show you an adjusted language. Some websites want to show you the right language, not for every country, but at least for several different locations. And in order to do that, they need to identify what country you're coming from, and then they can show you the right language. The website could also choose to show you adjusted content or a different process as a user you go through. Another example would be different pricing. Also, as you can see in the screenshots here on the slide, there are different kind of services, like here you can see for streaming services, where the service is not open for a specific location. And in order to identify if you're allowed to come in or not, the website needs to identify what's the country you're coming from. So this is very important to understand when you're trying to collect data and get the right information, or even get access. You need to use the right country.
Aviv, we have a great question from the audience. Gabriel is asking, still regarding residential IPs, is it possible that heavy usage would cause it to become labeled as a proxy IP?
No, that's not possible, because we have very, very strict limitations on not only when you can use the residential IP, but how much you can use the residential IP. That means we will never let you get to that the rate of that usage that might risk the IP. The residential peer-to-peer network is probably the most valuable asset we have, and we protect it very well. So no, that can never happen. Okay, so if no further questions, I'll go to the next topic, which is overcoming rate limitation. So before everything else, I'll start by explaining what is a rate limitation. So that a rate limit is something that websites apply, and they want to do that because they don't want anyone to attack them, or they also want to prevent unwanted usage. Basically, what it means is the website will so-called cap the number of requests or clicks per time period. So for example, a website could say, or could define, you can't make more than 20 requests within 1 minute. And maybe they got to some conclusion that anything more than that is definitely not a human user, and they want to prevent that. Once an IP is flagged, it checks, the system also checks if there's other flagged IPs that could be from the same range of IPs, which I'll explain about in a second. And this is important to understand because the websites know how to block an entire range if needed. here we have a little screenshot of ranges of IPs. So going back to the example I gave earlier, we can see on the left screenshot, pretty much in the middle, there's a prefix called a /24, which has 256 IPs. So let's say a website flags a few IPs, and then it checks and it finds that all these IPs are part of the same /24. As a safety measure, what they might do is just block the entire /24. That means if you have more IPs from that range, they're also going to be blocked, and that's something that you want to avoid. So a few things to overcome rate limitation. The first thing is that you want to work with the right pool size, the right amount of IPs. In this screenshot, what you can see is the configuration, the settings of a zone in the Luminati account. And in the green box, you can see IP pool size. Here it says 1500. So you need to make some first assessment or consult with your account manager, which can definitely help, and start with some pool size of IPs that make sense. If you work with enough IPs, then you're not going to make too many requests with each IP, and then you're not going to get to that rate limit to begin with. Another thing you want to do is you want to make sure you rotate the IPs in a proper way. So it's great if you have the appropriate pool size, but if you don't rotate the IPs and just keep using one IP, obviously you're going to get blocked pretty quickly. So it's kind of a test and optimize game. You want to start with some initial pool size that makes sense. Rotate the IPs, maybe even every single request. Here's a screenshot from Proxy Manager, and you can choose, for example, to rotate every single request. That'll definitely help you avoid rate limitation. So one last note before I hand it off to Chris about the LPM, and that is, I just want to tell you about an amazing new feature which we've released, which is called the 100% uptime. So if you're a Luminati user, this is very, very beneficial for you. We basically built a fallback system for cases, for example. I'll start by saying we closely monitor our network, and we have a very, very good system for keeping it stable and finding issues and resolving them very quickly. However, sometimes there's things that are outside of our reach. For example, every data center will periodically do maintenance. And when they do maintenance, there's maybe for a few minutes some connectivity problems. It might be a few minutes, but it could be very important for some of our customers. In order to resolve this problem, we've built the 100% uptime. So as I started saying before, this is a fallback system. Means for each IP you have, we have a fallback IP. And if our system will detect that there's connectivity problems with your IP, it will automatically route your traffic and the next established connection through an IP which is up and working fine. Also important to note, this feature is completely free of charge and doesn't require making any changes in your code or how you work. Simply make sure the 100% uptime checkbox is enabled in your zone. So handing it now to Chris, our product manager managing the Luminati Proxy Manager, the LPM. Thanks for your time, and Chris, here you go.
Thank you, Aviv. Hi, everybody. Let me quickly take over screen sharing. Hi again. My name is Chris. I'm an engineer working for Luminati, and I'm also product owner of Luminati Proxy Manager. Before I start my presentation, I want to give you a quick poll. I'm really curious about the level of scraping skills. How would you assess your scraping skills? Are you beginner or intermediate or maybe advanced scrapers? Itamar, can you show the question? So I'm going to give you a few seconds. Take your time to give an answer. And let's wrap it up. Let's see the results. I think we can already see the results. Okay, so most of you answered, I've done some automated scraping independently using customized software. All right. So there's also a lot of beginners and actually all the levels. So this is good. Actually, I have great news for all of you because Luminati Proxy Manager, or LPM as we call it, is a very simple to install and start using, which means it's a good tool to utilize by even beginners. It has real-time statistics. It has a live preview of all the logs, so it's great for all the proxy operations monitoring. But if you have a little bit more understanding of web technology, which is headers, you know what fingerprinting is, you know what IP rotation is, then you can easily utilize your skills and play around with probably most powerful tool in LPM, which is rules. You can play around with plenty of features like retrying on failed requests, headers rotation, and many, many more I will be talking about really soon. Before I start presenting live demo, I want to just give you a mental map just for a better understanding what LPM is. In the slide, you can see that it lies, it's an extra layer which lies exactly in between crawler and super proxy. So instead of sending traffic to Luminati Super Proxy or any other provider like external vendor, you send your traffic to the LPM, and then it acts as a one entry point for all the proxy operations, and it can manage it for you, send it on to the proper place, either Super Proxy or any other provider. It can manage authentication. It can manage all the features that I will be talking about, like retrying rules and many more.
Chris, before starting the demo, we have a lot of technical questions.
Sure, go ahead.
The first one is, do you have protection from blocking by firewalls like Cloudflare? Who can check which type of client, for example, web browser, server, or mobile device, is connected to the target server?
Okay, so great question. Thank you for that. By default, LPM is open only on localhost. So there is no firewall needed, actually, and you have a full control over who can connect to the LPM. As I mentioned, by default, it's only localhost, but you can host LPM on an external server, and then you just whitelist yourself your IP, or maybe a range of IPs if you are connecting from the office and you want to whitelist whole office. That's it. So there's no need for the firewall. Of course, for the double security, you can also set up the firewall by yourself on the server.
Another question that we have by Sebastian is there any way to know what kind of bot detection a site is using, or is it just trial and error?
So LPM by itself doesn't tell you what exactly blocking is target site performing, but as I mentioned before, it's a very powerful tool, including the live preview of all the requests, which is very, very useful for debugging. You can have a full control over what's going on. You can preview every single request and debug it request by request, see the status codes, see the response. So it's pretty easy to. It helps a lot with figuring out how to unblock yourself.
Another question by Igor is, which kind of IP do you recommend for online, almost real-time, and high-volume data collection?
Which IP? I'm assuming you're asking about the network. So as Aviv already was explaining, we have 4 types of network, and all of them are super available, but probably both static data center and static residential are can perform the best, because these are like fully, we own them, so we can use them as much as we want.
Another question that we have from the audience is, what is a super proxy?
Super proxy is our name for a load balancer. In a regular world, without Luminati Proxy Manager, you can connect directly to super proxy, where the traffic is load balanced and sent on to the proper network, meaning that we have 4 network types, residential, data center, and so on, and you can keep sending the traffic to the same point, which is super proxy, and from that point we send it to the proper place based on the authentication. And if you don't want to play with the authentication, because if sometimes it requires some coding time, you can use LPM, which I'm presenting, which helps a lot with the all the management.
We have another question from Abner Kohli. I'm giving you permission now to unmute your microphone, so please ask your question. Abner, just unmute yourself, please.
Okay, I'm sorry. Does this tool has any data collection, for example, or analytic way to analyze some of the requests or some of those things?
I'm sorry. Can you? I think I didn't understand the question. Can you repeat, please? There's
okay,
some background noise.
Those LPM brings to had some data feature in order to analyze requests or something of that model.
So you can analyze by yourself. LPM is a tool which gives you the opportunity to debug. There is live preview, as I mentioned. There is statistics. You can analyze by yourself. We don't do any analysis in the LPM.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks for all the questions. I think now it's time to introduce you guys to the LPM. I will show you, I started sharing my screen. I will show you the UI. On the right-hand side, I'm running a Luminati process in the terminal. On the left-hand side, I have already opened the dashboard. This is an empty LPM, which is a welcoming page just after you install it from scratch. Let me really quick create the first proxy port. I'm leaving all the options with the default values. And that's it. I just created first proxy port. It gave me the command that I can copy and run in the terminal. And that's it. I just sent the first request. Let's see what the command was. It's curl, and it's using as a proxy localhost on port 24000, which is exactly the port that I just created, 24,000. And then it's sending the request to lumtest.com/myip.json. And the response is just here. And the same request has been shown in the live preview that I was promoting so much. So this is basically taken from Google Chrome developers tool networking tab. So many of you are already familiar with this feature, with these widgets. You can have a preview of the response, the headers, response headers, request headers. So here you can debug, you can see exactly what's going on under the hood. On the right-hand side, you can see the statistics. It's a breakdown by status codes, the domain names, and the protocol. And in the main space of the dashboard, you can see the port that I just created. All right, so I have prepared 4 practices for you guys today. Really quick. The first one is to play a little bit with the geolocation. So we need to open a proxy port in the LPM, which we already did, set the targeting to Germany, and then I'll show you how to really quick test if it really works. So I will connect the browser to the LPM, and I'll prove that the geolocation changed. All right, so let me get back to the LPM again. I will be using the already created proxy port. If you click this little icon, it will open a Chromium, which is pre-configured with this proxy port. You don't need to play with the configuration. The proxy is already set. Let me go inside the proxy. And here I have the live preview again of all the requests. And now if I go to whatismyippro.com, I can see all the subsequent requests on the left-hand side, which is kind of cool. I see exactly what's going on. And the LPM gave me a random IP in Luxembourg, which is fine, but now I want to play a little bit with it. So under targeting tab, I have a drop-down with all the countries, and I'm gonna choose Germany and hit refresh in the browser. Let's see. Boom, I'm in Germany right now. Which took me a few seconds, a few clicks, one drop down, and that's it. So it was really simple, straightforward, and it really worked. I changed my geolocation. All right, so this was the first practice that I had for you today. Let's move on to the next one.
Chris, we have another question from the audience. Maybe
sure,
it's
go ahead.
really related to what you are showing now. I've been using rotating residential IP for months, but I have never been able to stay on the same IP address for more than 5 minutes. It sounds pretty unbelievable that IP address stay active for such a short time. How can I keep rotating IP address for a longer time?
I understand you want not to rotate, you want to keep the same IP as long as possible, right? And the maximum was 5 minutes, and you want to keep the same IP over the longer period of time, like 1 hour or maybe even longer. Yes, so this is really relating to the second practice that I have for you guys. So I will answer in a few seconds. All right, so when I was creating the first proxy port, I left all the options by default. And by default, LPM keeps the same IP over and over. So this IP is ending with 117. If I keep refreshing the page, I'm getting the same IP over and over, which is fine, which is exactly what you want if you are using a browser connecting to the proxy and you perform full page loads. Like if you are loading a page, there is multiple subsequent requests and you want all of them to be done from the same IP. Or maybe even you are doing some account management and you need to log into some account, perform some action like checking advertisement and then log out. It's even more important to keep the same IP. But on the other hand, okay, so maybe now it's a good opportunity to answer to your question. So you want to keep the same IP longer. If it's static residential, it's very simple because we own the IP and we can keep it as long as you want. There's no tricks behind it. If it's residential, then there's multiple factors behind it. Because these are real people in front of their computers and mobile devices. They might go offline at some point. And there's no way, there's nothing we could do about it. We can't reuse a connection which went offline. But if you're saying that you are not able to maintain the same IP longer than 5 minutes, then there's a pretty good chance that maybe you're targeting very specific location. Like, of course, we cover multiple cities all over the world. But if the city is really small, if there's, I don't know, 500 people living there, then there's a pretty good chance that we have only 2 peers there. And in such cases, it's super difficult to maintain the same connection longer than a few minutes. But if this is major places like New York or any capitals in the world, then it should be surely possible to keep the same IP for hours or even for days. So my recommendation would be to make sure that you are using long single session, then that your targeting is not too specific, and also you may also choose you can target operating system Windows, which is usually the most stable. All right, so let me continue.
Before that, we have another last question. How do I pull local LPM for scalability?
Again, please read the question again.
How do I pull local LPM for scalability? And Mark, I gave you the option to ask the question, so you can just unmute yourself and ask.
I think I understood. So you want to scale it horizontally, right? You want to run multiple instances, but if it's correct, please confirm if you already unmute.
That's exactly correct.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so maybe I will start with not answering your question. There is also a way to scale vertically, meaning that by default LPM is running on the cluster mode. So if you have a strong machine with 64 CPUs, for instance, then LPM will automatically utilize all the CPUs, will run 64 workers, which is the easiest option to scale. But if you're asking specifically about scaling horizontally, then it's actually a pretty new feature which we launched a couple of weeks ago, or even 1 week ago, that LPM automatically synchronizes the whole configuration per account, meaning that if you run, let's say, 5 instances on different servers completely not related to each other, and you log into your account, then all the LPMs will run the same configuration. You can play with the configuration on only one of the machines, and then it will be automatically populated to all the rest machines. The only challenge that is left for you is to split the traffic, to do the load balancing, which we are working on. This is going to be the next milestone, that LPM will come with built-in load balancer. But for now, this is the challenge that we leave to the user. So you can run 5 servers, run LPM on each of them, and you just need to put the load balancer in front of them and split the traffic, and that's it.
So if we do some sort of sticky routing, then we can guarantee that the IP address will stay the same during the session of that particular user, so they're not bouncing from one LPM to another. That's great.
Yeah, so currently the responsibility lies on you and the load balancer to stick the session and keep using the same instance. But as I said, this is in our roadmap. We are working on providing with built-in functionality like this.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great question, by the way. Let me continue. So I covered long single session. On the other hand, you may not really want to open the whole browser and load the full page. You may want to scrape single resources on some API. So very simple example of an API is lumtest.com/myip.json. Obviously, in real life, it will be kind of probably e-commerce or whatever domain which serves an API and some resources. In this case, you don't want to reuse the same IP twice, and you want to rotate as quickly as possible, because anyway, this is a single request, and you want to get a new identity on each request. And this is just one click. You choose rotating here from the preset list, and it's done. If I click refresh, as you can see, I keep getting fresh new IPs over and over on each request. What else? It's not only the IP, but also out of the box, it gives you fresh. It's not a fresh. It's just a random user agent. So in the preview of the headers at the bottom of the page, you can see that each request is getting a new user agent. So IP user agent. There's a little bit more than that, but it's almost entirely new identity. But Josh will cover this topic a little bit more in depth after my presentation about fingerprinting. All right, so this was the second practice that I had for you, and let me move on to the next one, the third practice, which is about the rules, the most powerful part of the LPM. So rules can be utilized in multiple ways, and I could be talking about rules for hours, but let me just present 2 basic use cases today. And the first, it's probably the most important use case for using rules, retrying on failed requests. If you're a scraper, you must have already encountered a problem which is getting blocked by the target site. If you have not, then you will for sure get blocked at some point. And the target site can block you in a variety of ways. But let's focus on the most common one, which is just sending the status code, some specific status code like 500, 403, 502. Let's focus on retrying request if the status code is 502. So I can really quick configure a rule. In order to configure a rule, I need to enable SSL analyzing, which allows LPM to intercept connections. And now I can configure a rule based on status code 502, as I promised. The action will be to retry with new IP. How do I test it? In the logs. This is the great debugging tool. If I keep sending the requests, I see that status code is 200, so it's okay. Nothing should happen and nothing happens. But now I want to mimic getting blocked from the target site. I can mimic it by going to http://stats.us/502. This is a very cool API for testing, very simple also. Whatever number I put under the slash will become a status code of the response. So now let me go to this sub page, and indeed I can see that something happened. I can see 502 status code in the logs viewer, and let me show you what's hidden under this little green arrow. it showed me the rules pane, and it says that some rule has been applied, triggered. And indeed, in the timing, I can see exactly that the first request was sent and then it was retried. In my example, the final outcome is still the status code 502, just because this API is designed to always give you 502. But in a real life, hopefully, you just got unblocked. Sorry, the first request was blocked, but the second was with a new fresh IP, new headers, and this way you got unblocked. All right. If there are no questions about that, I can move on to the last practice that I have prepared for you. This is also about rules. It's utilizing rules, but it's a different use case. Now I want to optimize the bandwidth. So if you have ever scraped some e-commerce product page, you may caught yourself on loading many resources which are not needed, that you don't care about, like images, fonts, videos, and actually the only thing that you do care about is the content, like probably the price of the product, the title, and the little description. So probably tiny part of the whole response is something that you are interested in, and you need to waste whole bandwidth on images and other medias. So how I will give you the solution now. I will create 2 proxy ports, and one I will leave for the benchmark, and in the other proxy port I will configure a rule, and after that I will show you the comparison. All right, so in this proxy port I'm going to remove the rule, so I will leave this proxy port kind of empty. There's no magic behind it. I will duplicate it, and I will add a little magic behind the second proxy port. So based on the rule, if the rule includes PNG, JPG, and so on, so it's kind of like image or video, I will just skip it. I will give a null response, which means I will drop the connection. And now let me really quick show you how it works. I will open 2 browsers. The first one will be connected to the first proxy port on the right-hand side, and the next one will be connected to the second proxy port on the left-hand side. And in both of the browsers, I will go to the same page, which is instagram.com. Let's see. Give it a few seconds to load. Okay, so you can see that on the right-hand side, the regular landing page was loaded. On the left-hand side, this is the same site without images. So we can't see the difference in the response time in such a simple test, but on average, obviously, if you skip loading images, it will be faster. But most importantly, you used less bandwidth, so you paid less, so you saved money. All right. So
Chris, we have a few questions from the audience.
Sure.
The first question is, could you show us the 502 rules in the configuration again?
Yes, sure, no problem. So you can define a rule based on, for example, status code, and here you can type whatever you want, and like whatever status code you want, you can combine them, meaning that this is a regex, a regular expression. And this is actually even more powerful. It doesn't have to be regular. It doesn't have to be a regular expression. It can be any JavaScript code as a trigger. So you can type any logic you want and return either false or true if you want to trigger such a request. I hope I answered your question. I mean, you only wanted to see the status code.
We have another question from the audience, Chris.
Mm-hmm.
Please.
Hi, Chris. My name is Hubert. So the question I have for you, I have actually a couple of questions that are related. Number one is, I see that the rules, they rely on status code, and also yesterday when I checked, they rely also on the URL. However, one of the use cases I'm running into, the call just crashes because it's very likely that the IP is banned. So what it returns a SSL error, but it's a fake error. And the question here will be, how can I detect that, and how can I issue a second call? Because currently, when I do it manually without using the LPM, I can just detect that an exception and issue a second call using a different zone. So that would be question number one. Do you want me to carry on or give you a chance to respond first?
Give me a chance to respond. So I'm not sure what's going on, but there's a really good chance that in order to define a rule, you had to turn on SSL analyzing. So you had to allow LPM to intercept the requests, and you didn't trust our certificate. If you break the connection end-to-end encryption and you put LPM as an end in the middle, you need to trust LPM because there is no end-to-end encryption anymore. So correct. Probably the errors that you are getting are related to this.
Actually, Chris, the error is kind of unrelated to this problem. Even when I use my machine without a proxy, sometimes I don't see the status code. It's just, think about it like you're making a call to maybe your IDE, you have a breakpoint and you just interrupt abruptly the communication. It returns without status code. So sometimes there is no status code, basically.
Okay, so if you have defined a rule, then some of the requests are just without status code, right?
Correct.
So I can answer. I don't know the answer right now. I don't know what's going on. I would need to investigate it. So please stay after the workshops. I'm more than happy to assist, and I will investigate. But right now, it's too little information. I can't answer right away.
Sure. So my second question would be: I currently have the work done without the LPM. So in other words, I can make a call with imposing my number of retries, the waterfall, the target country, the acceptable codes. Will I be able to just abandon this and move to LPM? Will LPM stand and substitute all these features that I implemented by myself?
Yes, exactly. This is actually the great part of the LPM, that it saves a lot of development time. All this is already included in the LPM. All the rules that you mentioned, like waterfall, targeting, performing some actions based on status codes and the response body, and even more, it's already implemented, yes.
Particularly acceptable codes.
I'm sorry?
Let's say I make a call and 404 or 502 is something acceptable to me. I don't want, so I want the rule to apply it to everything, but sometimes I just want to have this exception, accept 502 for this call. Would that be possible?
Yes. So as I mentioned before, you can use JavaScript to define the trigger. So you can write something like if, and then you can have a list of status codes that you are interested in, like I don't know, 200, 201, and 200 and 403, and these are the status codes that you like. So if status code is on that list, you can return true. Otherwise, you can return false. Or you can write any logic you want. This is very, very powerful.
My apologies. I think I made myself not really clear enough. So let's say you have the rule and you want anything that is not 200 to retry, okay? But sometimes for one particular call, for one particular target, you want to make a call, and maybe you can issue an option within a call so that LPM can understand, okay, for this one, this status code now will be acceptable. Is that something that we can do, or we have to have like a different rule for that?
So again, you can have multiple rules. The first one may be covering all the. I understand that you want to cover a very specific case for specific target site, like a domain, right? So one rule can be only for catching the domain, that you are like an exception, and the other rule can define the general rule. And also, again, if you have JavaScript, you can write any logic you want. So whatever you come up with, it's acceptable. It's just code that you execute. Yeah. All right. So, is there any other questions?
Yes, there is two more questions. The first one: could this technique be used to defeat in-page fingerprinting elements? If so, does Luminati have some rule templates that can help us with that?
Of course, these rules are designed to bypass blocking and to mimic new identities and to change the fingerprinting. And we don't have listed any specific strategies. We can recommend you, depending on the target site, the strategy, but also we have a great product, which is Unblocker, which does it automatically under the hood, out of the box, which Josh will be talking about in a few minutes. So you can play with fingerprinting by yourself. We provide you with a very powerful tool. You can define the rules inside by yourself, but you can use our predefined rules using Unblocker, which Josh will introduce in a little while.
So guys, we have a lot of other questions about fingerprinting. We will take them in Josh section. Thanks.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. All right, so let me wrap it up. I showed you 4 practices, and this is it for what I have prepared for you today. One last note before I hand it off to Josh is that what I showed you is the LPM. It's an NPM package. You can install it locally on your computer. You can also install it on the server. But we launched a new option, so you can let us install it for you within you can hit a button, activate, and within 10 seconds you can have LPM running on our server. There is no installation process, it's just working. So please check it out. There is one week for free. You can decide if it's a good fit for you. All right, I hope you enjoyed my presentation. Thank you guys for your time. And now Josh will be talking about how to overcome active fingerprinting. Thank you.
Hi everyone, can you hear me?
Yes,
My name is Josh. I am an engineer and the product manager of the Unblocker and the data collection automation platform here at Luminati. Unblocker is a tool, kind of a drop-in smart proxy that you can use with your existing data collection systems. The goal is that it smooths the rough edges under the hood and makes things work better.
Josh, we have a problem with your video. Can you please start it again?
Sure. Better?
Yes, now we can see you. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. So Unblocker is designed as a smart proxy that you can drop into your existing proxy infrastructure, and it will just smooth the rough edges. Data collection automation is a platform that we've developed to take the burden completely off of your shoulders. You tell us what you need to collect, and we give you back the data on the schedule and the format that you require.
Josh, maybe before we start your presentation, we have a question from Joe Harrison. Do you have any advice on dealing with the still bot detection?
Okay. Distill is an anti-bot system that sites use to protect themselves. As far as I understand, they act as the entry point to the site, and they are in control of everything about the request until it gets handed off to the site behind it. Like most anti-bot systems, they do browser inspection, which means that if you use any kind of automated browser tool like Puppeteer or Selenium, there are clues inside of the browser that can give you away, that basically indicate that the tool is being used in an automated fashion. You want to basically turn those features off or use a package like Puppeteer Stealth to kind of override them. And that's just the obvious stuff. The subtler stuff is there are tools that will inspect properties of your browser which are harmless on their own, but can be assembled together to construct a fingerprint of the browser that's running. We'll cover that in a couple minutes when we talk about active fingerprinting. So for now, I would say, and this leads into my kind of general principles, there's no silver bullet. There's no one practice that you can just like turn this one feature on and everything will start working again. Every site is specific. Everyone is looking for different things. There's a lot of data available when you browse the web, and it depends what the person on the other end is watching for. More specifically, you should be finding kind of one golden example that you're working towards. Let's say it's a user running Chrome on Windows, which I would say is an extremely common use case on the internet. So you wouldn't, whenever you make a change to your data collection system, you don't make it randomly. You make it to unify it to this example. But this means that you have to inspect everything that you're doing, and you have to inspect what the browser would be doing in your case, and you have to make sure that they match. Before we kind of get into the details, let's see which aspects of fingerprinting have you already started to manage in your data collection? Okay, so let's see the results. Headers, that's good. Headers is a good starting point. It's interesting to see that HTTP and TLS are not higher because they can really matter in some cases. Okay, so the first aspect we'll cover is what I call passive fingerprinting. This is anything that the site can measure about you without doing any extra work. You're already talking to them to kind of get the pages that you want, and these pages have some information, and they can measure this information about you. So, for example, in this case, the headers, if you are sending headers that claim that you are Chrome 81, let's say, and the headers that you're sending don't line up to what Chrome 81 sends, then it is clear to anyone who's paying attention that you're not actually Chrome 81. So you need to make sure that you're sending all of the headers that Chrome 81 would, but you also need to make sure that you're not sending any of the headers that Chrome 81 would not. There are also situational headers. So the headers don't look the same in every case. If you come to a site for the first time, you will not see cache control headers. If you stay on a page and reload, you will see cache control headers. So you need to pay attention and measure what the real browser does in the situation that you are trying to capture, and you need to make sure that your code is doing the same. The header order matters. The Chrome DevTools by default adds a little bit of, let's call it user-friendly interference. They alphabetize the headers, they make sure all the casing is nice, and they make sure that it looks pretty. But the reality is that the headers are not sent in the same order as the DevTools would show you by default. There is a view source button which you can use. I don't know if I would trust it fully. The most accurate way to tell what headers are really being sent is to open Wireshark and capture the traffic from your browser. It's a pain and it's actually quite complicated to do, but it's the most accurate way to go. Actually, an example for this, you can't even trust your code necessarily. So even if your code is claiming that it is sending the headers in a particular order, it could not be correct. When we were developing Unblocker, we found that in Node.js, we were specifying the scheme, authority, method, and path headers in one order, and they were being reversed before they were sent. So we needed to use Wireshark to capture our own application's traffic to catch this. So once you have the headers all nailed down, you have to pay attention to the protocols. Some sites are available on HTTP1. All sites are available on HTTP1. Some sites are available on HTTP2. And the difference between them can sometimes be the key, because if HTTP1 or if HTTP2 is available on a site, Chrome will use it by default. So if your headers say that you are Chrome and HTTP2 is available, but you're not using it, then again, to someone who's paying attention, that can be a key that you are not who you say you are. Once you move to a different protocol, you also need to pay attention to the headers again, because that type of headers that HTTP2 sends and the type of headers that HTTP1 send are not the same either. You'll notice here that the HTTP1 is capitalized and the HTTP2 is lowercase. The other interesting thing to note is that HTTP2 happens over a single connection, whereas HTTP1 requests can be spread over multiple connections. Once you get your headers down and your HTTP2 version is correct, depending on if your site supports it or not, the TLS fingerprint of your request, or the fingerprint of the TLS socket that you use to connect to the target site can make a pretty big difference as well. By default, the ciphers, the encryption ciphers that, let's say, Node.js uses when it connects to a target site don't line up at all with the ciphers that Chrome on Windows would use. Also, the Chrome on Windows would support many more extensions to the TLS protocol than Node.js would. This is a harder property of traffic to measure because you basically have to build packet inspection into your load balancers, which not everyone can do. Anti-bot systems will do this, so they can and do measure this sort of thing. But it's also one of the harder things to develop. So most programming languages don't give you the fine-grained control by default to interfere with how the TLS connection is made. You might need to get a little bit involved. As a quick spoiler, this is something that Unblocker can handle for you.
Josh, maybe before you continue, I just want to make sure that you answer the question, why would the TLS version will matter? Why the TLS version matters? Because everything, you send a lot of information to every site you visit. And the site can look at any of this information and decide to do anything it wants with this information. So if you are sending headers that claim you are Chrome and your TLS fingerprint makes you look like Node.js, some sites won't care, some sites aren't looking, some sites will care, and they will use this information and decide to not let you through. So now we'll try a demo to kind of demonstrate how difficult this is. I have set up a test site which basically does the type of fingerprinting that I'm talking about. This site is measuring the attributes of the request that I'm sending it and giving me back some feedback about whether I passed or failed. In this case, you can see that the fingerprinting site thought this was a navigate request, which is true. The user agent seems fine, the headers are fine, the HTTP version is fine, TLS is fine, and everything looks good, which makes a lot of sense because this is a real browser. But if I copy the URL and I move to something like curl, we can see the request that is sent, which looks like this. And we can see the answer down here, which is that I failed. It recognized it as a navigate request, but the user agent was wrong. And you can see up here, if I take a look at the user agent header, it's curl. It's announcing itself as a command line library, which isn't exactly what we would do in normal situations. So maybe we can try to fix that by taking a look at the network tab in the browser, and we can copy the user agent that the browser uses. So I will copy this, and I'll add a header. So now we see in the network traffic, I am now claiming to be Chrome. And the problem is that I'm still failing. The user agent is good, but the header values don't line up to what's expected. The accept header is wrong. Many of the other headers are also wrong. Capitalization is not correct because if Chrome over HTTP1 uses capitalized headers and not lowercase headers. Also, the TLS version is not right, and the HTTP2 version is not right. The ciphers aren't right for this request. So I can try to take this request and completely copy it. So I'll copy the entire request as a curl command. So in this case, if I take a look at the information that's being sent, you see a lot more information. The problem is that it's still wrong. And this is for two reasons. One is the browser is not copying the information correctly. You can see here, it's copying all of the headers as lowercase. The problem is that they're only lowercase if you're using HTTP2. In my case, I'm using HTTP1 because I'm using curl. The other problem is that a lot of the header values don't match because of this HTTP mismatch. And despite the fact that I've copied many of the headers, the TLS version is still wrong. So it's not simple. It's doable, but it's not simple to get this all right. There's a lot of information when you connect to a website, and you need to make sure that it's all correct and all kind of orbits around the golden example that you're trying to imitate. So just as a quick preview of what Unblocker can do in this case, I'll copy this request. So you can see in this, I haven't set any headers. I've only specified a proxy. Oops. I've only specified a proxy,
and a URL. And what it returns is that the user agent was correct, the headers were right, the header case was right, the header order was right, the version of HTTP was right, the TLS version was right, the TLS connection was right, and the HTTP2 session settings that I was using were correct. So if this is something, if handling this level of fingerprinting is something that seems daunting or challenging for you, this is something that we can handle for you. The Unblocker proxy that we've developed basically takes over, it intercepts your request in the middle and does some massaging to make things work better. This means that it picks the right IPs correctly, it manages the headers correctly, it will make sure that your TLS fingerprint makes sense. It can detect when a site has blocked you by like a status codes or captchas or text that says you have been blocked, or maybe they sent you the wrong content type, and it can automatically retry to make sure that you're only getting successful data through.
We have a few questions from the audience. If you can back to your previous slide. So first, someone from the audience asked if the Unblocker retried the request under the hood, and this is exactly, I guess, what you just now explained.
Yes.
And the second thing is about if I use the puppeteer in incognito, you can get a new fingerprint for each Chromium instance?
So I'm going to talk about this a little bit more in a minute, but this is another case where you can't necessarily trust your tools, because Chromium in incognito is detectable. There are differences between Chromium in incognito and real Chrome on Windows. There's a couple of, just off the top of my head, I think that if you run Chromium in headless mode, then the accept language header is not sent. And if you run it in incognito, there's another difference, which I can't remember off the top of my head, but I know that there is a difference. So that's one challenge. The second thing, because active fingerprinting happens primarily on the client side, it's too complex to try to manage on the wire with Unblocker. We can try to make sure that your traffic matches at a protocol level. We can try to make sure that your headers kind of your user agent maintains consistency through your sessions. We can make sure that you don't send any ridiculous headers, but we can't simulate the entire browser to know what you should be sending and stop you from sending something incorrectly. We do have a solution for this. It's the data collection system I talked about earlier, but there is still, if you use Unblocker with a full browser, there is still some responsibility on you to make sure that you're not being caught by browser inspection technology. Are there more questions?
Yeah, a few more questions. So first of all, a question I asked because I tried it and I could not get banned IP to be listed in the banned IP section, but I will try again in order in which rule declare important, and I gave you permission to, you just need to unmute, Jean. So if you want to ask your question, because I didn't understand it, sorry.
Okay, sorry, I was just replying to a response I got earlier from Chris about the question in the previous section. That's not related to what we are talking about right now.
Great, so Chris will answer it, sorry for that. And another question is the Unblocker already available? And is there added cost for it?
No, we charge the same for the Unblocker as we do for our residential network. These extra features are kind of sugar on top of your connection, but you pay the same for the bandwidth.
Great, so you answer also another question. The second part of it, can it be used as a last option when waterfalling with LPM?
Yeah, you could do that.
Great, thanks. Last question from Hector, and then we'll progress. Hector, please.
Oh, sorry, I actually asked if it was already available. I raised my hand and added the thing here, so thank you.
No problem.
Great,
Right,
so it's available, and please progress.
Okay, cool. So now we step into the world of active fingerprinting. When there's a browser involved, I already mentioned that you send a lot of information to a website whenever you use it, but when a full browser is involved and the website is sending code to your browser to do inspection and report back, the number of things that you need to pay attention to increases by quite a bit. passive fingerprinting is when the site uses what they already have on you to measure properties about you. Active fingerprinting is when they create code which intentionally tries to interact with your browser and discover more about it. So an example of this is sometimes a site will redirect you to the same page multiple times to see how your browser handles redirects. They'll see if you're sending the same session, the same cookie, the same headers. If your IP changes between the two requests, then that's kind of strange, and they'll penalize you for that. Even things like the flow of pages that you're going to can be used to construct a sort of fingerprint about you. For example, if you're collecting data from a grocery store and you always go to the search page and you always search bananas and you always like go from page 1 to page 50, like real users don't do that. So you can watch for traffic patterns, and you can kind of assign probabilities of a bot based on the traffic pattern and not necessarily based on anything that you're sending. So some ways that sites will kind of deliberately interact with you to check information about you include deliberately breaking HTTP protocol just to see how you handle it. So I know there's an anti-bot system out there which will deliberately send you malformed cookies because Node.js by default will error or collapse the incorrect character down to a single space, but Chrome by default will collapse the incorrect character to 4 spaces. So if they send you something incorrect and they know how Chrome would handle it and you don't handle it that way, then they know that you're not Chrome. Local storage can be used to persist some kind of user ID or client ID, even if you're clearing your cookies. I think Puppeteer by default will use a different storage profile for every time you call launch, but this is a case where you should actually check to verify that you're not preserving local storage data between data collection sessions. WebRTC is a protocol that was developed for peer-to-peer file sharing and like video calls and conferencing, and it uses UDP by default, which is different from the default TCP connections that the rest of the web works on most of the time. The trick here is that UDP connections will not go through your proxy by default. So you can use WebRTC to leak the real IP behind the proxy, which can be used to block you even if you're using a proxy. So you can use extensions and you can check your browser settings to make sure that your WebRTC traffic is being proxied correctly. One thing to note here, for many, the default response will be to disable WebRTC. But again, you need to orbit everything you do in your application around the gold standard you're trying to imitate. Real users on Chrome, on Windows, let's say, don't have WebRTC disabled. So if you do, then that makes you a minority, and that makes you identifiable. Canvas fingerprinting is quite similar. The graphics hardware and the fonts and the kind of general physical configuration of your computer will result in drawing specific types of images slightly differently on one computer to another. So many browser inspection systems will draw some kind of image on a canvas in your browser, and then they'll just check what the image was. And based on what the image was, they will know if they've seen this particular browser before or if it's new. There are extensions that will tamper slightly with the way that canvases work. I know that Firefox has the ability to tamper with the way canvases work if you check the settings. This is something that you need to measure carefully in your code because just doing it differently isn't necessarily better. You have to move it towards what the real user you're trying to imitate would do. Even the window sizes that you use in your application can matter. Puppeteer, I think by default, launches with a window size of 800 by 600 pixels, but 30% of the world is on either 1366 by 768 or 1920 by 1080 screen sizes. So if you're, and I don't know anyone, even if they have a smaller screen, who opens a 600 or an 800 by 600 window and just leaves it like that and browses. Most people will take a browser and they'll make it full screen. So if this section of the fingerprinting problem sounds like a headache for you, we have a solution for you here as well. I mentioned a little bit about it earlier. The data collection platform that we have set up handles this top to bottom. We manage the proxies, we manage the crawler, we manage the fingerprinting, we manage the blocking. You send us what data that you want to collect, and we will deliver the results back to you. You can pick the format, you can pick the schedule, we'll integrate with what you need us to integrate with, and that's it. It takes the problem off your hands. That's it for me. Are there any more questions?
No, thank you.
All right, I'll hand it back now to Omri to wrap up.
First of all, thank you, Josh. Very interesting. And I want to thank in this opportunity for Chris and Aviv for taking the time invested in this presentation. And of course, thank you guys for attending. We'll send over the presentation with some links to our calendars. Feel free to approach anyone from the North America team. We would love to take questions, or just have a call if you have some questions. Of course, intro you to one of our product managers if we need to. Anyone who has been a part of this workshop can use this link to sign up, and we'll provide a $100 bonus for trying out Luminati. And of course, if we need any questions, that will be great. This is the links to our social media. And I think the most important part is if you could take the time and kind of answer some of our survey questions so we can be better. We work really hard to improve our product, to improve our workshop, to be part of the community, and to do some, of course, to be part of the education process in this market. So if you could take just 5 minutes, we'll be grateful. And again, thank you everyone, and thank you for the time.